All right. Thank you for having me, and thank you for flying me down from Copenhagen to talk to you people. It's always nice to be back in Belgium. Metric Sceptic, I would love to talk a little bit about data, probably data from a different perspective than what we just heard, slightly different perspective in that I'm talking about data as something that drives our businesses and how we build businesses, but of course you can probably apply some of these things to the metrics that you might give to your end users. First, the briefest little slide on me, right? I've been doing product for way too many years, and I will probably continue doing that. Most recently as a VP of product, both at Worksome and Dixa, where we implemented Cool.io. That's why I'm here, I think. That's where the relationship was created, and then previously Zendesk and a small little company called One.com that does web hosting. Currently, I do a consultancy, so I've decided that that's a great idea. So I've gotten into product advising, so trying to help more businesses than just the one that I've been working for, 2 or 3 years. And just very briefly, what do? I generally help businesses figuring out what the direction is, where you're going with your company. I try to help in prioritization, especially around features and functionality you want to build in your product, and innovation. How do you actually achieve the features that you're trying to do? So that's generally what I do. Let's talk a little bit about product. And I think the colors are completely off, so it's going to be a little bit interesting to see how this plays out. Anyways, product stands often in the middle sort of everything. A lot of people don't really know what we do as a team, but I'm going to give you the brief sort of thing. Everyone has great ideas of what should be in a product, right? Everyone has feature requests or things they should do, and if they have a C in front of their title, they probably have even more ideas. Our job is to identify the ones that are most important so that we can sort of sift out all the other ones, so we can get to the stuff that actually makes sense for us to build rather than just all the great ideas that come from people with a certain title. Great illustration here. I believe, of course, and that's also why I've been here for 12 years into this, is that if you don't have product management, if this is not a function, and by the way, you could have people that are not necessarily called something product, but do product. But if you don't do product, don't think about the stuff you're doing, you're just going to build a bunch of features without really knowing where you're headed. I like to build product that sort of is a cohesive story. This is a heart, right? I can go out and try and sell a heart. Maybe no one wants a heart. That's fair. But at least I can try and sell it. So this is what we do in product. And in order to get there, and maybe just repeating this one again, looking very interesting here. We'll see how it goes with the presentation. But actually, that might be an issue. Okay. We'll see. We'll see how it goes later. I might be like, okay, I can't communicate you. Colors matter. Anyways, so how do we do that? In product, we try to find innovation. What I believe innovation is, the core, is something that is viable, something that customers are willing to pay for. That's why we're building businesses. We want to do something that's desirable, something users actually want to use, and those two things are not always the same. We have seen plenty of times where people are willing to buy something and then no one's using it afterwards. And feasible, something that we can actually build, something that is technically possible for us to build. Is often where we work with engineering teams, but it could, for that matter, be any team trying to establish what is feasibility. So that's what we do in product. And that leads to a certain level of skepticism. We are quite skeptic as people. And that same skepticism applies again. We need, as product people, when you get all your great ideas, the first thing we do is being skeptical towards that great idea that you have, because we need to find the good ones among all those great ideas you have. This is my general face anytime someone wants to get a feature with me. Do you really want that? This is a skeptic face here. And I have the same thing with data. Everyone wants to become data-driven. It's important to be data-driven. Let's get more data, right? Let's measure some stuff. It's always what I hear. They come to product people either because we need to build metrics that someone else can use, or because we need the metrics ourselves. So both of those things can fall on a product function, so to say. And then we turn into a very large discussion, often, of like, okay, but where do we then store them? How do we do events? Do we do databases? How do we visualize it? Oh, we need to model it first. We also need to figure out how we process all the data. It turns into, most times, a very long discussion, a very big project. If you don't have the infrastructure in place already, it turns into a very big project of what you're trying to do, because we're trying to measure stuff. We need to be more data-driven. We've made that decision. My problem with that is that I often see that takes so long. It takes a long, long time to get to good decisions. And that's where my skepticism sort of comes in. I think there is a better way than sort of starting with, we need a bunch of data, let's start collecting a bunch of data, and then let's build a whole infrastructure to support all that data that we can possibly imagine. I don't know if anyone has been involved in some of these projects where you sit in a workshop and then everyone's like, okay, let's figure out what is the data we want, now we want to be data-driven. And I've never seen so much data being put up, and then you're like, okay, cool, that's going to take us a year to build the infrastructure to support that. That's what I often see happening. So that is why I'm a very proud metric skeptic, as I call it. And it's something that I apply both because I am a product manager and a product person, so I apply it to anything I do, but also when it comes to data, being metric skeptic. So I believe that there is a different model that we can apply to this. Generally, I'll be talking about 3 different things. This is not overly surprising, right? When you talk about data, you often talk about measuring data, then you interpret that data somehow, and then you also act on that data. So my skepticism applies to all 3 things, and that's sort of what I'm going to run through. Let's start with measure and see where that problem starts. Why it starts with measuring everything in the entire world, it seems. I have often been in those discussions, at least. So we're data-driven, so let's start measuring what's important to our users. We should start measuring stuff that what we can figure out what is actually important. And this is just one brief example that I'm going to give you, but this is something I've been involved in so many times as a product person. The first thing that someone comes and says to me when they want to make decisions on product and what they want to do in their product, they say, actually, we have the software, right? We built it. Could we just sort of quickly see how many is clicking things? Sure, we can do that. So you do a little bit of this. This is always how it looks, by the way. The data is always the same. The data is always all the time over there in the sidebar where you built that big button that you created there in the middle. It's used a lot. If you have a sort of a right-click thing or a sub-menu, not very often used, that's usually where we go. I do this all the time. They always ask for this. And that's because we have this assumption when we ask for this that number of clicks equals importance. So we've already said to ourselves, okay, well, we need to measure stuff. Let's go measure how many click things, and then we can make magical decisions based on that. Obviously, this is how it is. When you measure hits, how idiots track success. Generally speaking, I think if you look at the little sub-menu here that we had, the ... thing, and anyone ever building tools probably implemented something like that at some point. Well, in here we do have a little delete thing, which is very normal to put in there, generally speaking. And this is never going to be used. No one's ever going to click that, hopefully, because they don't need to delete all the time. But does it mean that it's not important? Does it mean that it's something we shouldn't have in our product? Is it something that what is the type of decision that you're trying to make based on that fact? Oh, no, that's not the case. So what I do is I know, because I'm a product person, I know that that isn't right. I know that that is not the right way to measure that. So that's one example. And I could do a whole presentation just on this. So I'm not going to do that. But I could do a whole presentation just on, we want to measure something, and then you spend all the time saying, your date, why are you measuring this? This doesn't make any sense, right? How do I know that? I know that because I talk to people. When it comes to software, building product, and being a product person, I would probably have had interviews with customers. I've had conversations with customers or users or non-users or seen what the competitors do or whatever else I do. And from that, I can gather, actually, I know that this is still an important feature. I know that the data you're asking for isn't right. It's not the right data that you're asking for. So that's the first thing. When I do that, I use my empathetic skills. They are in us all. I believe that very deeply, that when we start talking to customers, when we start having conversations, getting outside of the room of just discussing data and metrics and numbers, that's when we can start challenging those same numbers. So we need to apply our empathy when you want to start measuring something. So that's the first step. Combining the data you want to, the metrics you want to collect, with the empathy of talking to customers, engaging with them, doing interviews. Hopefully this is not too crazy. Hopefully most of you know that the best way to qualify your quantitative data is to do qualitative data, right? So first step, measure with empathy. That's important. Second step, how do we interpret this step? Where does the skepticism come in here? Well, we do have a tendency, I think, to believe that data is the ultimate truth. We see metrics all the time, and we're all like, oh yeah, that's probably true, right? Did you know, by the way, that Nicolas Cage drowned people in swimming pools back a few years ago. He did that quite a bit because numbers show, I mean, this is data, I'm not saying anything here, but data shows that every time Nicolas Cage made a movie, more people drowned in swimming pools. These are real numbers, by the way. I'm not making the numbers up themselves, but it doesn't quite feel right. Did you also know that Internet Explorer turned people into murderers? Back when that was a thing, that was back in, oh, it did. I agree with this. I mean, this is probably true, I would say. And for me, anything that Microsoft makes turns me into a murderer. Again, the numbers showed that every time we saw the decline in Internet Explorer market share, that also had a decline in the murder rate in the US, specifically in the US. I'm not sure about the rest of the world. Okay, all right. These are kind of stupid examples, right? They're fun, but they're also kind of stupid. But I do know that this isn't right. I haven't actually made a long data analysis on this, and you don't have to either. You already know with your brilliant brains that that ain't right. And this is, of course, a very good example, but there are many times where you're going to be facing data where you're like, it doesn't feel right, doesn't seem right. Good. Hold on to that, because this is a great quote. If you torture data, it will tell you anything, right? So you can basically make data tell you absolutely anything you want. And I've been working with some of the companies I work with now. We're sort of collecting data and trying to model stuff. And we keep talking about, oh, we could also do it this way, we could also do it this way. And it's good to have that sort of underlying intuition, as I call it. You have your intuition where you can go in and say, okay, actually, I know from my experience, this doesn't seem right. I have skills. And I just think, this is a very personal thing of mine, that I think it's important that we don't take that out of running businesses. We do have intuition, and it's very important to have part of our decision making as well. And it's the same when it comes to data. Use your intuition to figure out if the data is right. When you feel like it doesn't feel right, oh, that's a good sign, right? Do something about it to figure out how it is. So what I'm saying here is combine it again. Use your data, use your empathy, talk to other customers, talk to other people, use your own intuition. Acknowledge that there are people who are experts, pull them in when you need to, or find the right people for that job, right? So you can find people who do have experience and skills and who have great intuition. Sometimes you can also recognize them. If I show something to this person, they always challenge it. Good, let's start there. All right, so this is where I believe that we're sort of moving a little bit away from data-driven, where this is sort of my approach to these words, is that data-driven for me is that data drives my decision-making, meaning that data is the most important thing that I can possibly have in my business. Whereas I believe that data is important, yes, but I do think that it combines with other things, maybe more soft skills, human aspects, dare I say, you know? But I do think that that's important when we're building businesses. Moving away from being data-driven to data-informed. Data is part of the decision-making that we're making. It is not the full truth of the matter. So that was those two. And then we'll come to the last one, act. Fine, okay, we're getting data, we've applied our empathy, we've applied our intuition. Where does this lead? What is the action that you want to do? This is a little bit back to also what was mentioned before. What is the action that you're trying to do from this data? How many times have I seen companies gathering tons of data? Actually, maybe they could even be this good and actually figuring out, okay, what is the type of data that we want to collect and measure and interpret the right way? And then I'm like, okay, cool. What are the actions we're making? Oh, no, we made a dashboard. Okay, but how are we moving forward here? I think that it's important that you always consider the action that you're trying to make based on the data that you're gathering. If you're not, it's a waste of time. And you might think that, oh, but we're just gathering some data. It's a waste of time. And you're probably building something, if you're building it in your product, you're probably building something that's not needed. You're probably collecting data that isn't needed. I think that there is another way, and that is we need to look at the data and act on it. If it's a low number, what are you going to do? If it's a high number, what are you going to do? Tell me what it is that you're going to do. Give me some level of insight into what your thinking is here. Because this is where it starts to get important as well, is we can't rely on building businesses based on data only. We can even challenge it and qualify it and make it really good data. But I think, this is a very personal opinion, but I think that opinions matter when you're building businesses. Because I can look at any number in the whole world and be like, yeah, that shows me, okay, but what is it that you're trying to do with that data? We all have different approaches. being presented with the same data, we could all probably act differently in the businesses we're in, and that depends on the people that you have. If that wasn't the case, we could just replace businesses with robots and get over it, right? And all sit on a beach. Fine by me, but we're just not quite there yet. So opinion is incredibly important to drive action. Don't be afraid of having an opinion in this. So I'm seeing all of these four together. Data, combine it with empathy, make sure you research. Intuition, make sure that you think about yourself and your own skills in this. And also, what is your opinion? Arguably, intuition and opinion can be connected, but opinion is connected to the action that you're trying to achieve. This is an insight to me. This is what I call insights. This is when I work with companies, I talk about this as an insight. Okay, when you have all these things combined and you also tell me your opinion on this data, then I can learn something, because insight for me is something that's like, yeah, it's the bulb, right? We all know it. I'm not sure where that comes from, because I've never seen a bulb across my head, but okay. And this is where I believe that we are being inspired by those insights. When I see great insight, and they happen quite often, when I do see great insight, it inspires me to want to make changes. And that's why I believe in not being necessarily data-driven. And I know that there are other talks about being data-driven and probably also different approaches to understanding that concept. But I believe in being insights-inspired, moving away from data-driven to data-informed, which is great already, but actually going all the way to insights-inspired. It's okay to have an opinion. It's okay, it's something that drives you. So pretty simple, you could argue. So we have this in a full sort of circle here. The skepticism that I talk about applies everywhere. And by the way, it applies much deeper than what I've shown here and in so many other things. But we don't have 6 hours to go through all of it. I did want to talk about how you can then do this more effectively. How can you actually think about this? And what I essentially say to companies that I work with and to product people who often sort of, we need to measure something, is flip it around. Turn it around. The normal thing that we do is we always gather the data. Then we interpret the data, and then we act on it. It's almost the 5 stages of CAC stuff. There's a few of those elements in there. I'm saying start the other way. Start with understanding what is the action that you're trying to do, not what the metric is that you're trying to collect. If you can't tell me what the action is you're trying to do, I will stop listening. I will not pay attention anymore. So tell me what it is that you're trying to achieve. What is the action that is going to happen? Are you trying to remove features in a product? Are you trying to drive more revenue? What are you trying to do? What are then the numbers that can show you that? Well, wait, I haven't collected the data yet, so how do I know? I can't interpret data that I don't have. You can. You can just imagine it. And I know that's a little bit annoying to just imagine data, but you can actually start by saying, okay, well, let's put it out, because it's cheap. It's just a thought experience. It's something you can do on a piece of paper here. What if the data shows this? What if the data shows that? What are the signals that you have towards the action that you're trying to achieve? These are the things these are the metrics that I'm thinking will change. You can start interpreting them. So you say, I don't think that makes any sense. Before you've measured anything, you haven't measured a thing yet. And then you can say, okay, but let's say that we're measuring this data and we've actually applied our intuition to it. Then we can start looking at that data that we now have, lack of data, rather, and say, okay, well, let's say that it's a very low number. What are you going to do? Let's say it's a super high number. What are you going to do? What if it's in the middle, but combined with this, it's sort of, you can very quickly spec it out. And again, if there's no meaning, if there's no opinion, if there's no sort of action behind it, does it make sense to measure? Is that just a waste of time to start measuring that? Because once you've established that, on the other hand, if you can see that there is an action, if you can see the metric that you're trying to measure, and if you can see that, okay, if they go this and this way, you've already applied your intuition, you can apply it much earlier. And then you can also go out and talk to a few users and make sure that your data makes sense, right? Apply your empathy. And once you've done that, you can then get to the actual data that you're trying to achieve. So flip it around. Instead of thinking about all the data that you want to achieve or all the data you want to collect as being data-driven, start by all the actions you want to do, build down from there, and then hopefully you know the exact data you're trying to measure, and then you'll spend the time building the right data rather than spending time building either the wrong data or insufficient data or incorrect data or whatever you want to call it. And that's it. Thank you.